You're tuned into Auto Intelligence, live from Auto Trader, where data, tools, and your preferences sync to make your car shopping smooth.
They're searching inventory.
Oh, yeah.
They find what you need.
They're gonna find it.
You can make a budget for your wallet to help you succeed. Pricing's precise and true.
So true.
It's smarter car shopping.
Ooh.
Just for you.
Oh, it's just for you.
Ooh.
Find your next ride at autotrader.com. Powered by Auto Intelligence.
Saturday presents, in the red corner, the undisputed, undefeated Weed Whacker Guy. Champion of hurling grass and pollen everywhere. And in the blue corner, the challenger, extra strength, Saturday. Eye drops that work all day to prevent the release of histamines that cause itchy allergy eyes. And the winner by knockout is Saturday. Saturday, bring it on.
Have you heard about Hyphenly from Immigrantly Media? It's a curated roundup of books, articles, music, podcasts, and other interesting things we think you'll love, delivered straight to your inbox. Subscribe to Hyphenly. The link to the newsletter is in the show notes. And now to today's episode. Hey everyone, it's Kavitha Davidson, and welcome to another episode of Sportly. Each week we discuss lesser-known sports history, iconic events, notable athletes, and impactful moments on and off the field. Moments that all too often fall to the sidelines of history. We promise to bring you interesting interviews with sports industry professionals who can give us a fresh perspective on the stories, trends, and business forces shaping the games that we love. So this week, let me introduce you to my dear friend and esteemed colleague, Shireen Ahmed. She is a multi-platform journalist, an acclaimed speaker, and a tireless advocate for equity in sport. She serves as a senior contributor with CBC Sports in Canada and currently teaches journalism and sport media at Toronto Metropolitan University. She is also the co-creator and co-host of Burn It All Down, which you might remember from our first ever interview episode with Jessica Luther. Burn It All Down is a pioneering feminist sportscast, and Shireen is a global expert on Muslim women and brown women in sports. So I hope you enjoy this chat with Shireen, where I got to pick her brain about everything from the Hockey Canada ruling to the new Toronto WNBA team to hate watching the US Open dating show. Hey, Shireen, it's really good to see you. I feel like men never have to answer this question, but I also wrote a book with our very good friend Jessica Luther about the origin and nature of fandom, so I'm going to ask you this question. How did you become a sports fan? Like, what was the first formative sports memory or experience that you have?
Watching the Montreal Canadiens with my mom. She's a huge Canadiens fan, Montreal Canadiens fan. And when she moved to Canada in 1972, she fell in love with Guy Lafleur, and she fell in love with the type of hockey they played. And my mom still is like totally like emphatic. Some would say belligerent, but I inherited her sports fandom. I mean, getting into sports journalism, I guess, was sort of an extension of that because of the way that I'm analytical and the way that I critique and the way that I look at things. So it was sort of an extension of that. But just generally loving sports was definitely from my mom and dad. And, you know, I'm brown, so like racket sports, squash, badminton, all that kind of stuff. And then my first love was always soccer. But I think she kind of taught me to be unapologetic in the way that I love sport. And that has sort of been the formative basis for everything I've done afterwards.
I love that. I was going to say, for a brown woman, Muslim woman and an immigrant in Canada, a little friendlier than the U.S., but not by very much to people like us. What was her experience? How did she get into hockey? Was hockey ever a place that felt like it wasn't meant for her?
I don't think she interpreted it that way. I just think my mom rejects ideas of what she's a very different person. Like, she's a psychiatrist. She looks at the world very differently than I do. Like, I'm like more sociological in my approach and my analysis. And she's sort of like, oh, no, that's not a thing. Oh, yeah, this is for me, 100% for me. She owns it completely. So during the Montreal Canadiens' recent playoff run, I had my mom on Burn It All Down, and I interviewed her for the playoffs. which everyone thought was just, like, amazing and wonderful. So CBC, like Canada's national broadcaster, picked up on that interview, and it kind of went viral. The fact that I was interviewing my mom. So then a radio program in Canada interviewed her. Day 6, CBC radio program interviewed her, and they just loved her because of her candor, and she could remember, you know, Frank Mahovlich. She could remember Yvonne, you know, like, it was so important that she could recollect and chronicle that history. And so that's a really fun story. And I'm sure if you Google it, it's still around. But she talked to me at length about, she came to Canada and she would do like housework and stuff. She was a trained physician, but not practicing when she first came over. So she had time. And then they didn't have a TV initially. And then they would go to someone's house for dinner and the game would be on and she wouldn't interact with the party. She would just watch the game. So people thought it was hysterical and encouraged her, and she loved it. And then they got a TV, and this is way before the Ottawa Senators, because my mom and dad lived in Ottawa at the time. So Montreal was a team, and then it was solidified. And, you know, my brother grew up hardcore Habs fans. And, you know, I've had a very, like, sort of turbulent relationship with men's hockey. And I tried to break up with them several times. It's been really interesting, and having that connector through my mom. Like, I was actually at a conference in Montreal when Guy Lafleur died. I was there and I called her. She was the first person I called, and I said, I need to tell you this. And her voice was really heavy, and she was just like, I know. I was like, do you want to take the morning off? And she's just like, I might. But I think her approach is similar. She would go to distract herself and then sort of process later. Like I tend to do, like, let me get busy and let me distract myself with work, because I love work and I work too much, like my mom, who still works full time at 77. So she did. She did work that day, but then we had a long conversation. We got home and she just looked through some memories. She has a picture with him. She met him. She went to the Bell Center, bought a new matching red hijab to match her jersey. Oh. He signed it. Yeah, it was crazy. It was years before that. And he was lovely. And she met him. And I think she was 18 years old. Like, it was wild. And then my dad is like this brown, white bearded man, was taking all the pictures. And, you know, like, it was the most adorable thing for them. And I was really happy for her, you know? So that's kind of where that comes from. And it's a really sweet piece of history. And I'm really glad I talked to her. Like, I think it's one of out of the many, many years we did the show, it's one of the interviews that, because I'm chronicling my past and stuff that I didn't even know. Mm-hmm. Like, my mother didn't know what ice skating was when she was growing up, because she grew up in Peshawar, Pakistan, and they didn't have it. She didn't know. And she told me in that interview, there was a little boy who came to visit them, who was a British family, and they were posted there. And he was explaining to her what ice hockey was. And she's like, what do you mean you're on blades? Like, what does that mean? She, like, you couldn't, and this is way before the internet, like, way before. So she went to the school library to try to look it up in an encyclopedia, and she did.
It's funny that you say that. We did an episode about field hockey and how field hockey is like the sport in, you know, our parents' countries of origin. And as quite westernized people, field hockey is not a sport that I followed, right? But how do you think we reconcile those two things? That, like, is there something to be said about, you know, the true immigrant experience of absorbing the sports of where you grow up?
So I recently, on the weekend, was at my son played in a basketball tournament. I have 4 kids, and my third guy was asked to play.
They're all tall, by the way.
They're crazy tall. This one's 6'6". Like, he's a volleyball player, but he was asked to play in this basketball tournament because they all play ball on the side. They have basketball runs here and there. And I love going to watch them. Like, you know, I watch professional sports and report and opine for a living, but watching them in grassroots places is still really important to me. And so it's an Indocan. It was an Indian or South Asian tournament. It was a Desi tournament. Oh, wow. And my stepson came, and my husband's Black from the Caribbean. And his son was like, I've never seen brown people ball out like this. Like, he's like, this is not the court that I'm used to. So it was just really interesting, because my husband and I went for a walk last night and we were talking about it, and how, you know, the origins of basketball in different racialized communities and what it means. And, you know, people don't realize that there are like hardcore desi ballers. Like I did a piece not too long ago on Brown Ballers, an organization, and they had a team of a lot of Canadians, and I met them. And then at the tournament this past weekend, I saw some of them. And one guy's name is Arjun Basi, and he's like 7'3". So I'm like, hey, what's up? And he's like, hey, auntie. And it was like, you know, props. And my son's like, you don't know him. I'm like, of course I know him. He's my boy. What are you talking about? So we get to flex a little bit. But I've seen Filipino communities, the basketball in Filipino communities is wild in Toronto, Chinese communities, Eastern European ones. Like, so it may not be what we think immediately, but it doesn't mean it's not embedded here. And you're right about the field hockey. When I talked about hockey, my grandfather talked about hockey, we were talking about two completely different sports.
Right. Because
he played hockey in a league or university in India in the 1930s. That's what his sport was. He played field hockey. So it was just like, it's really interesting. And in terms of adapting, I think it depends on where you are and how you grow up. But at the same time, with sport, we know you can't help what you fall in love with. So,
yeah. Literally, you can't help what you fall in love with. And just like to kind of close the loop on the basketball players. I mean, all of us were rooting for Symbol to do some things in the NBA. I think literally like every single brown person of every stripe texted me when he was drafted.
Yeah. Hey, your guy. I'm like, yeah. I mean, yep. I had it. It was so bad that when Jeremy Lin was winning with the Toronto Raptors, people were like, hey, I'm like different Asian, but okay.
I mean, yes. Okay. But you know, like same when he was a Nick, obviously, when Linsanity was happening. And it's funny that you say that because like I had written a piece a few years ago. It was when AAPI violence was kind of at its height, like during the pandemic. And, you know, I interviewed a bunch of people, you know, from all different types of Asian backgrounds about kind of the perception of us as not particular types of athletes. But we are all now being recognized as fans and in some capacities coaches and executives, right? So I guess that is, you know, the whole model minority thing kind of follows us everywhere we go. But the court or the field is one of the last barriers for us to break.
100%, which is why I found that Brown Ballers was such an important thing. We have our first player in the PWHL, the Women's Professional Hockey League, who's South Asian.
UBC grad and women's hockey player Shireen Basi has made hockey history 3 times over now. She became the first South Asian player taken in the Professional Women's Hockey League draft when she was drafted by Vancouver in the 6th round last week.
You've got drafts, you've got people playing in Europe, playing basketball and all kinds of sport. My daughter is not the only South Asian to be playing university soccer in Canada. But she's definitely probably one of the first hijabis to be playing in this region, I'm pretty sure. So it's slower than it should be. It's a little bit slower. And I mean, we get back to, you know, this is a perfect segue into back to the topics in Bend It Like Beckham. We're 22 years later, we're still there. Mm-hmm. Why are we still there? And the irony is that in the area that I live in, because it's a predominantly newcomer immigrant community, like probably 30-40% South Asian, Arab, Filipino, Black. The cricket at the local high school, the cricket teams are unbeaten in their streaks. So there's ways in which this can benefit, right?
Yeah. Speaking of Bend It Like Beckham, and we will absolutely get into that because I know you've got some thoughts. But how much of the barriers that South Asians face in sports, how much of that is kind of self-imposed by our own communities, by our own parents, not in our cases specifically, but, you know, the idea that especially as, you know, first or second generation immigrants, we have to go into fields that we know to be safe and we know to make money and to establish yourself versus, you know, the kids who want to play sports in high school instead of spelling bee.
Well, I mean, that's exactly it. I think when you come from an immigrant experience or that's part of, you know, your family's priorities are different. And for a lot, sports is extracurricular. A, it's expensive. B, the rules surrounding it are unfamiliar. When I interviewed some of the players from Brown Ballers for my column, one of them was like, my mom had no idea what it was. And she was like, what do you mean you have a future in this? Like, what future? And then he's like, no. And then it took time. And, the communities, the younger generations are all on board. Everyone wants to ball. Everyone wants to ball. It's like a language. And so, but it's taking time because you go to engineering or you get a basketball scholarship. So to a parent who knows that education and access to it is not particularly where we come from, it's expensive and it's not for everyone. But here it affords you an opportunity to get somewhere in life. So education is absolutely non-negotiable for so many. Like I come from overeducated, hyper-ambitious parents, right? But they were chill with me. Like I wasn't told I couldn't play sports. In fact, they really encouraged it because of the balance. But also that came from the socioeconomic strata that they came from back home. So not everybody is like that. If someone's family's struggling, they're not going to have the money to pay, rep basketball fees or whatever it is. Like it's ridiculous. The pay-to-play systems in North America are atrocious. And I see that and I understand it. So sport for some communities, it's a pathway. For South Asian communities, it'll always be math or medicine or education. I'm 40 years old. I have a very, very solid career in journalism and in media. My dad's like, you could just 3 years. You could go. You could go to medical school. 3 years. That's it.
Oh, every single time. My dad still wants me to go to business school.
Like, I'm 48. Like I'm not going to medical school. Like I have no interest in it. I'll watch The Pit, but I'm not, that's it. That's where my relationship ends. So we'll see. Maybe it's so funny. He's like, you're totally capable. I think that was my dad's thing that I could have gone and I actively chose not to. Yeah. So that's just not a thing, But anyways, and the irony is my mom being a physician was just like, no, do what you love because that's what I did. And she, much like your mom, was in a profession way before her time.
Yeah. And that's actually, not to get emotional, but yeah, my mom was extremely, she was a neuropathologist and a research scientist. And until the day she died, she was the only one in the family really who understood why I do this for a living. Because she always pursued, she didn't go to big pharma. She pursued her own academic and intellectual freedom. And she valued that in a way that I don't think a lot of other people in my family understood. So, and I also love that both of us, I don't think I knew this about you, Shireen. I love that both of us have our origin stories rooted in our mom's fandoms. I think that says a lot for setting the table for how we've approached our journalism.
Well, that's the thing. I've been super impacted by them and their encouragement. And although I love Bennett like Beckham, and as you said, we'll get into it, that's not my journey. I didn't fall in love with an Irish bloke. I wasn't prevented from
I've fallen in love with many.
I've fallen in love with Ireland, but I was very encouraged. And I was also given the tools to be able to navigate the systems that accompany people who look like us in those spaces. I was told very early on about Jackie Robinson, about Muhammad Ali, about resistance in sport. Those are conversations that we had. Because the first time I was racially abused was on a soccer pitch. I was 11 or 12. And so those conversations have to happen early from communities like ours. And my daughter plays on a soccer team at York University in Toronto. And she's one of many, many internationals who play for the university. There's 2 women from Guyana, 2 young women from Grenada. I think there's one who's Lebanese. My daughter plays internationally for Pakistan. She's dual citizenship. So there's a lot of dual nationals. So the makeup of her soccer team looks very different. I still play in what we call a grandma league. I am the only non-white person on my team. Just to give you an idea of soccer, what I looked like when I was young is what it looks like now for my age group.
Yeah, that's a perfect segue into how little progress seemingly there has been when it comes to not just diversity, but our approach to the inclusivity of sports.
Introducing the perfect companion to your morning listening routine. AG1's clinically backed formula is now flavor-packed with 3 new delicious flavors: tropical, berry, and citrus. Start the day on a high note with probiotics that taste like the tropics. Mix it up with micronutrients that taste like berry or citrus. And take it all the way back with the classic AG1 Original with notes of pineapple and vanilla. Do your health a flavor or 4 with AG1 NextGen, the daily health drink. Learn more at drinkag1.com.
You wrote earlier last year, like ahead of the Paris Olympics, about the hijabi ban that France was imposing. In France, like, this is not a new topic specifically in France. Obviously, their extremely aggressive brand of secularism tends to target Muslims and immigrants from North Africa more so than other types of immigrants. Shireen, you and I specifically have had conversations about this for, it seems like, at least 10 years now, and specifically around things like the Olympics or things like international basketball, and it seemed like there was progress in the early 20s. It seemed like FIBA lifted their hijab and headgear ban. Nike came out with a sport version of a hijab. But where do you think we stand now? Have we gone backwards?
So FIFA uplifted theirs formally in 2014. FIBA was 2017. I think there was a moment in time in early 2020s is the murder of George Floyd, which is a catalyst for all the discussions about oppression in sports and wider society, sports being the microcosm of that. France has actually never wavered. I've done work on France for a very, very long time in terms of like gendered Islamophobia, North and West African racism, anti-Blackness, anti-Muslim sentiment, and they're absolutely rife with xenophobia. And just the idea that sport is supposed to envelope people and the spirit of sport is supposed to include and envelope people, whereas France uses and weaponizes it to be like, if you want to be French, you have to do sports in this particular way, which is actually not the essence of what sport is. So it's really confusing. So I'd been hollering about this since I started hollering into a podcast mic and before. I've been writing about this since I started working in sport. And I told my boss at CBC that I would be writing this column, and my editor's like, okay, we're the rights holders for the Olympics in Canada, like we're the broadcast rights holders. Who are you flaming, just so I know and I could tell the higher ups? I'm like, oh, everybody, the IOC, the FOC. At one point, I remember I was invited to the United Nations in Geneva, and the COC, the Canadian Olympic Committee, was there, and I yelled at everybody there. When I say yelled, like I'm literally on stage going, if you are in a chat group or have access to the FOC and you don't tell them that what they're doing is actually oppressive, there is a problem and you are not doing your job. So then don't come to me and ask me to be in a picture upholding your multicultural values when you're not listening to me. This is antithetical to the Olympic Charter. Women in France do not have access to sport at any tier and any level. That is oppression. And what is more French than going to the Riviera or spending the day on the beach? And women who chose to wear burkini was having it violently ripped off. It's not about participate in sport. It's so specifically, you must only participate in sport this way, which is inaccessible, expensive, ableist, xenophobic, all of those things. So yeah, I wrote this column. It won second prize at the IPS Media Awards. That was really fun. But the irony about it was I'm like, everybody kept talking about the Olympics like it had reached gender parity. I'm like,
well, actually,
comma, it's not like that. And I think there's a way, I mean, I get told all the time, I'm like, I kill joy and whatever. But Baldwin said, we critique America because we love her.
We love it, yeah.
And why would you bother investing time and energy and brain space if you didn't want to make something better that has the capability? To answer your question, are we going backwards? No, I think the cowardice is stunning. I think the lack of backbone from anyone in the upper echelons of governing body, well, it will never cease to amaze me how little integrity they lead with.
Well, France has such a hold on the upper echelons of the IOC government, right? Like the fact that this is France, aside from the, secularism as part of French identity part of it, like just from a administrative part of it, the fact that this is France is a big part of this story as well.
There's all these women's groups that, I fight with members of their party all the time that are like, no, hijab is oppressive. You don't actually get to say that. You don't get to decide for a woman who's actively choosing something that that's not your call. And I don't think that's hit yet. They haven't made the connection between the idea that forcing women out of clothing is as violent as forcing them into it. Both of those things are about control and policing women's bodies. They're both the exact same thing. You want to rip this off me? You want to force it on me? No. The foundation of all of this has to be choice. And you have to respect it. It's about respect, and you don't honor that. So all of those things, one of the greatest parts, CBC was covering the Olympics, so I was like busy the entire time. And then the last day of competition, I took a flight because I had 2 weeks between the Paralympics, 2 weeks off. So I flew quickly to my cottage on the east coast of Canada. So I was on the plane when Sifan Hassan was getting awarded her medal. And I was about to lose service because we were literally taxiing to take off, wheels up. And she decided, because I don't know if a lot of people know that Sifan Hassan, the marathon gold medalist, one of the greatest runners in the history of running, she chooses to cover outside competition, the field of competition. She chose to wear a tracksuit and a hijab, and getting awarded the last medal of the Olympics from the president of the FOC, who looked visibly uncomfortable, giving it to her, was just like the cherry on top for me.
The first time since 1952 that an athlete has won medals on both the track and the marathon. An incredible feat for this woman.
And she did that conscientiously. It was an intentional move. And I will love her forever for that moment. Because if she decided to compete in France, the door would be slammed in her face.
Do you think those quiet acts of defiance, even though they're not exactly quiet, are more impactful or necessary? Like, is this an Ali X dichotomy that we need to have in order to fight this level of oppression?
I don't think it's that simple. I think any act of resistance matters. I mean, like we can currently see in the state of the world, people will act in what they can do, and it's really important not to judge what they are doing. We don't know what happens behind the scenes. We don't know what people's capabilities and bandwidths are. I'm louder than others because there's no, and I don't know if I'm loud, to be honest with you. I think there's just in the field that I operate in, there's so few talking about whether it's genocide, whether it's Palestine or Congo or Sudan. Nobody talks about it. The same way that nobody talked about sexual assault of female football players in Zimbabwe or Haiti when it came out. Few people talked about Afghanistan when they were, they're head of the federation. So I don't know if I'm loud or just there's not a lot of people doing it, but any type of resistance, and resistance, the path of it doesn't look one way. It looks very different. It could be academic research. It can be being part of faculty movements. It can be writing on something. It can be asking questions. It can be aligning. It can be educating. It can be reposting. I can't talk enough about reposting information. I follow an account on Instagram called Dab the Pineapple, and she's a beautiful artist, an affirmation activist artist, and it was about reasons why you need an iPhone. And then the bottom of the meme was like, you don't. Free Congo. Like, stop mining cobalt. You don't need it. Too bad. And just education pieces like that I find really, really powerful.
The last thing on the hijabi ban in France, obviously that will not be the case maybe obviously isn't the word. I would expect that not to be the case in Los Angeles, but who knows at this point. Do you see it getting better with Kirsty Coventry in charge of the IOC and succeeding Thomas Bach? I
want to be hopeful, but at the same time, I have yet to see a leader lead with compassion and justice in sport. I haven't seen it in my lifetime. I don't know. The closest I've ever gotten to it is Prince Ali bin Hussein of Jordan, but only because he funded the research that allowed women to participate in football, because he funded it. Is that justice? Or I don't know. So I don't know. I want to say yes, but the Olympic system, FIFA and organizations like that our dear friend, Dr. Frank Garitti, calls mafias in different ways, they have to prove to me before I trust them. And so far that has not happened. I think the lack of attention to climate change is concerning. I hope, Kirsty Coventry pays attention to that. The effect on climate change in sport is a very real thing. Abuse in sport, the fact, there's wider issues surrounding that. I think the way that refugees are coming into sport in a certain way, the thing that people in those positions like to say it so it's not political. But how do you explain refugees in the first place? I remember in Paris, one of the breakers wore a shirt basically talking about gender apartheid in Afghanistan and was disqualified.
Talash trained behind closed doors in her home until the Taliban was returned to power in August 2021. Eventually, she fled to Spain.
I'm like, first of all, the origins of breaking are political from the streets.
The origins of breaking are defiance.
Are exactly. And secondly, she's from Afghanistan. She wouldn't be able to do this there. Like, how are you? The erasure of that is what bothers me. Do I think Christy Coventry can fix it? I don't know. Does she have the chops to be able to clean house and maybe get people aligned? Those kind of positions, Kavitha, are so political. They're political more than anything else. They're about power. They're about control. And we'll see. Hopefully. But I don't know.
I will say that when I got, just from a journalism procedure standpoint, when I got multiple alerts about IOC, I think the headlines were IOC elects first African woman to be president of the IOC. And it's Kirsty Coventry, who has the chops, as you said, was, is from Zimbabwe legitimately, but is also a white woman from Africa. And, it was just like a little bit more specificity might be necessary, because y'all know what you were doing with those alerts. This Hockey Canada ruling, so much of my work and a lot of your work has been about sexual abuse in sports and just the lack of any kind of justice or consequences for it. I have to give a shout out to my extremely good friend, Katie Strang, who has done so much of the impactful reporting on this, and not just in Hockey Canada, but throughout junior hockey in the United States as well. The acquittal of all 5 players, specifically because of the survivor and the victim's quote-unquote credibility.
Caracia saying right at the beginning, virtually, when she started reading her ruling, that in this case, I have found actual consent, not vitiated by fear. I do not find the evidence of EM, who is the complainant, to be either credible or reliable. Justice Caracia going on to say, with respect to the charges before this court, having found that I cannot rely upon the evidence of EM, and then considering the evidence in this trial as a whole, I conclude that the Crown cannot meet its onus on any of the counts before me. So that kind of set the
How difficult was that ruling for you to see?
So I had texted Katie the night before, and she was on her way. She said there was a badly planned vacation, but I actually think it was an incredibly well-deserved and perfect timing. So she was on her way to Europe. I also, throughout the trial, had been texting my good friend Rick Westhead, who had done a lot of that initial reporting and broke the story about Hockey Canada. I hate to say it, or do I hate to say it? I think we all knew they would be acquitted. I felt like they were going to be acquitted based on the way the reporting was going from the trial in London, Ontario. And I'd been watching the coverage early morning, because I spent 7 hours in syndication talking about the ruling that day. And I ran into a host who I was speaking to. So syndication in Canada, you start from one coast and you go across. And because there's so many time zones, I ended up doing 17 shows in those 7 hours. And he said to me, I'm so sorry I didn't envy you that day. Like, it's fun to talk about like Olivia Smith and the highest transfer fee in women's football and this and that. But to talk about this, sexualized violence in sport. So when Justice Caracia said that she didn't find EM's evidence credible, it wasn't saying that she didn't find EM, the survivor, credible. It was the evidence. But just the way that was worded, I knew that they would all be acquitted, and they were. You feel it in your gut. It is never easy to see that, but I keep reminding myself it's not a justice system, it's a legal system. I was furious that Catherine Henderson, CEO of Hockey Canada, didn't make a statement. Nobody made a statement from Hockey Canada, which I thought was an atrocious decision, trying to distance yourself from something like this. It was hard. Like, I didn't write a column on it because I was doing the reporting on it for radio, but it was awful. It wasn't only awful for women, it was awful for so many people who were embarrassed. Like, there was that moment of embarrassed, like, do I re-engage with this sport? Like, what do we do? Is this the end of this? Like, what happens? And there's this great Instagram account, because Twitter is now just porn bots and fascism. I used to love Twitter, but obviously it's dead now.
We met on Twitter.
We met over Twitter. I met so many people over Twitter. I connect the Burn It All Down people all through Twitter. It's called the Sports Examiner. So it's sports sociologists who do critical writing and reporting in a non-journalistic sense. Like they bring attention to different campaigns and stories with a really thoughtful lens. So they had posted about it and how a not guilty verdict doesn't mean no accountability. And that's the piece here. The accountability piece is missing. When the Hockey Canada, the people at the head table decided to leave, they just left. Like when Scott Smith left, he just left. Like there wasn't any follow-up with that. And as we know, men in these positions fall upwards. So they just leave and they get a position somewhere else. So I think all of this and knowing what I know about it, I didn't actually have faith that the system would serve the survivor who did so many people a favor and like was incredibly courageous by coming forward and getting cross-examined 5 times so invasively. But what I thought about was the survivors who were watching and haven't come forward and will absolutely not be compelled to come forward again because of this result, because of this verdict. So that's where my head and my heart has stayed on this, in addition to the nasty emails I get saying, accusing me of being unpatriotic and hating hockey, which I don't. But it comes out like that, and it's disheartening and it's discouraging. And I hate it here, but this is how it is with hockey culture, very much, unfortunately.
Yeah, I think that those of us who have ever written about particularly sexualized or racialized violence in sports understand what it's like to be accused of not being patriotic or not loving the sport, which I'm always like, why would we choose to make this our career and our every minute of our day if we didn't love it? Because it's not exactly a welcoming place for us. Some fun stuff and then maybe some more serious stuff. But Toronto's WNBA team, let's talk about this.
Well, this is some history in Toronto sporting. Toronto's WNBA team has officially unveiled the team's name and logo. It's the Toronto Tempo.
Ooh, the Toronto Tempo. It's a fantastic name. It's, a huge signal of the rapid growth that we've just seen in the W, of the expansion. I'm actually curious your perspective, because you're someone who has a really good finger on the pulse culturally in both the US and in Canada. Has the reaction to the growth of women's basketball been as contentious in Canada as it has been in the US?
Toronto and Canada in particular gets a lot of cues in terms of the W and in terms of that kind of thing. Like, we love watching the W. I mean, the numbers for the NCAA finals are huge. They're more, again, they mirror the United States, where there's more watching the women's, because quite frankly, I forget that men play basketball at all during the NCAA Final Four. I'm just like, what do you mean men play basketball? Just because it's so riveting, and there's a lot of social media content on it. There's a lot of reporting on it. It's fantastic. I know that TSN has actually sent someone to the tournament, which is wonderful. Oh, it's fantastic. So contentious. I don't think Canada has a grasp on being able to navigate discussions of racial justice in sport the way that the United States does, which I think the United States, for all intents and purposes, is far ahead than Canada is. Canada likes to pride itself on being polite and inclusive, when it's actually not the case. And for most of it, it's the same systems of injustice and oppression that exist in the United States don't stop at the Buffalo border. They continue. And there are attempts to sort of say, well, listen, let's rally around the growth of women's sport and gender equity, but ignore issues of racial justice, ignore issues for disabled people, for queer communities often. I mean, a lot of the time in sport, to be honest, I feel like Canada is still a better place to be a gay athlete, a gay woman athlete. There's a sort of an understanding of that here. That being said, nobody in an active NHL team has come out, a man has come out as gay, whereas the PWHL, it's a common narrative. And, two of our most beloved hockey players in Canada, Marie-Philippe Poulin and her wife, Laura Stacey, there was a famous meme written about them. It came through Twitter. She's gay, Marcus. It was hilarious when that whole thing came out, and apt. So there's ways in which Canada and the growth of women's sports generally happens in a certain way. It's very carefully crafted. The NSL, the Northern Super League, Canada's first domestic soccer league. I'm on the broadcast team at CBC and am quite involved in the media side of things, is probably one of the best leagues that I've seen being built. But it doesn't have a corporate model like hockey or like basketball. It is from former players. We've never seen a league like this be built for players, by players, for players. And, you know, the Diana Matheson, Canadian soccer legend who played in the NWSL, she is very intentional about the way she goes about things. So Kilmer Sports, who owns Toronto Tempo, is owned by Larry Tannenbaum, who used to be a shareholder in MLSE, who owned the Raptors, and that kind of branched out. It's a little bit different. I mean, Teresa Resch worked for the Raptors. She's the president of the team. Monica Wright is the general manager and, you know, coming in. There's some good movement around that, but I think they're very acutely aware of who the audience is in Toronto. I would like to see more Black women in the front office. I can go on record to say that. In the same way, I'd like to see more in women's hockey. I'd like to see any Black women in front offices in hockey. I know there was one for New York, but has since moved into the WNBA, ironically. So all of this to say, similar issues that happen. I mean, people are thrilled about the W coming in Toronto. I think it's time. I think they're ready. I think there's time for multiple markets, not just one. But we'll sort of have to see. And the growth of women's sport should be accompanied by people that can help captain conversations. And we need more of that in Canada for it to go in the certain way that we want. And in the US, sometimes I feel like those voices get drowned out by men that just talk a lot and then actually don't know. You can't just take your knowledge of men's basketball and come into the women's space and start spewing. There are people who have been here for a minute. They know what they're doing, defer to them. And I think when sports starts to do that, we'll see the growth of women's sports generally at a better pace, in a better way.
Well, at the very least, you can gear up for maybe seeing Serena courtside, because Serena Williams has a minority ownership stake in the Toronto Tempo, which Serena's commitment from an executive and investment standpoint to women's sports has just, you know, been kind of unparalleled for a former player of her largesse. But also the Drake memes have just been amazing. And I mean, like Lily Singh is also a minority investor. So there's really interesting. In fact, there's another South Asian woman. So there's two Desi women and then a Black woman who are also minority investors, which I think is really interesting and really good because that's what we want to happen. I want everyone to be Michelle King. Like I want everybody, all women. I want that. I want that so much. And in basketball, it's actually really important because understanding who and what Toronto is so important in this, the culture of it, the way that the fans and community will respond. You know, with the growth of the W, we've seen, and you wrote a column about this, the growth of women's sports. We have also seen the growth of social media threats and abuse toward women athletes, particularly toward racialized athletes, Black women athletes. I mean, the first time I heard an athlete really taking action about this or speaking out about this was actually Raheem Sterling many, many years ago. So the men are absolutely getting it too, but obviously women in general just get more abuse online than men do, and they get it in a much more threatening and violent way. Is this an opportunity for a good use of AI? There are so few right now, but I know that Facebook and Twitter, before it was taken over by Nazis, and Instagram had actually done some work, whether ancillary or not, to work with FIFA and with some of the governing bodies to combat this because the athletes were threatening boycotts over it. What do you think? Is there a solution here because of just how much the Wild West, the internet and social media is?
Yeah, I did write a column about Jess Carter from the Euros and how horrible that was, but also the rise of women's sport. There's a correlation between that abuse and the rise because along with the good will come the bad. I am exhausted by the Caitlin Clark rhetoric. But the reality is that there will be, and to be honest, people who want to be racist, like spew misogynoir and other kinds of vitriol, would do it without Caitlin Clark. Like, I'm not here to say that she opened the door for it, but it came as part of her alleged fan base. But then you've got Paige Beckers, who I love eternally, who represents everything about advocacy, about allyship, being educated, about using her power and her position for good. I always say this to my students in my classroom. Like, I don't lie to my racialized women students. I'm like, it's going to be harder for you in this industry. There it is. They're like, well, wait a minute. So then I tell their colleagues, their white colleagues, do you want to be Caitlin or do you want to be Paige? It's up to you. The ball's in your court, literally. Who do you want to be? What legacy do you want to leave? Caitlin Clark is hitting numbers, we know, but so is Paige. But look at the work Paige is doing off the court, whether it's with food insecurity, mentorship. It's wild.
Well, and I commonly said this to people who just weren't paying attention. Before we had Paige, or definitely Caitlin, we had Sabrina. Like, I love Sabrina. The whiteness of these superstars is not the issue here.
Kavitha, I look to those with the most power to try to enact the most change, because we know that change, it's put as a burden on those who are the most marginalized. It's always up to us to like fix it. Like, I have powerful white male friends and I talk to them frankly. And I think using their advice and using their support is something that's important to me. And I've had male allies my entire career. In fact, the most obstacles placed in my way have been by white women. And that's something that is terribly uncomfortable for women to talk about. Black women, bless them, like so many other lessons that they're willing to teach us have come from them. And I was speaking to a high school group, and one of the questions was, what was one of the things in your career that blindsided you? And I'm like, white feminism. I was not prepared.
One of my closest friends, Jane McManus, who is a white woman in the industry, she and I have constantly talked about this. And whenever I give her a recommendation for a job, or I just kind of talk her up to her students or whatever, I'm always like, you don't understand how rare this is, because so much of my experience has been pulling up the ladder behind them.
Yeah, I mean, I am a big believer, Kavitha, in professional generosity. I used to recommend White Tears, Brown Scars by Ruby Hamad to everybody. It was like beside my Quran, like those are the two books. I was like, this is what I need. And then I got into Regina Jackson and Sarah Rao's book, which elevated it to another level. And I just don't want to get the title wrong, but I will shout it out because it was formative to me. And I had never heard someone write as candidly. Like, my favorite thinker is Indian philosopher, feminist, Arundhati Roy, and I love her writing. I mean, it's a little bit cerebral, so this was a bit easier, but Sarah Rao's book was just, oh my goodness, Dear White Women. And it's like what to do with your racism and how to do better. That's like, the book is just phenomenal. It's Regina Jackson and her, and it's honestly, it's a book that has changed my life, actually, because I'm like, no, you need to read this. We're not having this conversation right now. White women, like, I remember presenting at a university and a young woman came up to me and had specifically said, I don't have time to engage. I need to go to the next meeting. And she's like, well, I feel really judged by you talking about white feminism. And I'm like, and she started to cry, Kavitha. And I was like, oh my God, did you hear anything I said? I'm like, you really need to read this book. And I emailed it to her and never heard from her again, because I'm like, you literally practice the playbook. The idea of discomfort, because progress will take discomfort. And that's something that we all have to shift to. Nobody likes awkwardness and discomfort. I'm lucky because I'm awkward all the time. So it's less weird for me, but I've had to grow. I've had to unlearn. I've had to learn tons of shit again. I'm married to a Black man. Like, what that's like, not just language, but understanding and space and oxygen I take up in a room. I have to be really, really self-aware. But I've learned those things, and I work at those things. that can be uncomfortable. Too bad.
There's a fantastic Code Switch. This is not on topic at all, but there's a fantastic episode of Code Switch. Shout out Gene Demby, who's a friend, about the fierce whiteness of Taylor Swift. And I don't think it's intentional on her part, but, you know, Taylor Swift, like, just to not go on this is for another podcast in the Immigrantly network, but Taylor Swift and I are the same age. Could you tell that? Like, you know, and one of the main theses of this podcast was that she has been allowed youth and childhood and being a girl instead of a woman in a way that Black and brown girls are just not. So
that's crazy. And I never even thought, like, she's allowed to fantasize and be romantic in her notions. For us, it's like, grow up, get going. What have you produced? What have you done? What have you contributed? Absolutely. Oh, man.
Okay, I've only got you for a few more minutes, but I want to talk about some actually fun stuff. I know how much you love tennis. This is one thing that you and I like very much share. Actually, right after we stop this recording, I'm going to go to the new women's sports bar that just opened downtown and go watch Venus versus Taylor. But have you seen this U.S. Open dating show?
I'm Alana Sadaka, and this is Game Set Matchmaker.
Cheers.
The dating series happening here during Fan Week at the U.S. Open. 8 couples will be paired together to see if they can serve up something special.
I think the best thing you could do.
Yes, I saw the first episode, and I did a whole thing on a show in Canada about it. And I was like, oh, first of all, this is tacky. I do love watching tennis. Like, you know, I was at the National Bank Open and I didn't realize how much I actually liked it because I was like, oh, I'm not an avid watcher. But I root for everyone Black and brown. Also, for the record, for your listeners, Layla is an absolute sweetheart. I've interviewed her a couple of times. She is actually that thoughtful and nice, and she understands who Venus is and will give her the flowers she deserves. And she knows this, which is why I love them, because there's something so beautiful about a young racialized woman giving a Black woman her flowers so publicly. That is so endearing and gives you goosebumps. The show is garbage. I will watch it because it's that bad. If the backdrop would have been the games, or like I had made a point that watching the game together would be a cool social experiment in a date. Like, I'm loud when I watch sports, and it would have been really interesting if my husband knew that.
I've always said to any man who has loved me, including the current one, like, if you can handle me at a Yankee game or at a sporting event, like, you know, this can be real.
Yeah, that's exactly what it is. My parents have been married for 53 years, and my dad has now just told my mom, I will not watch the NFL with you anymore. He's like, I can't do it. It's terrible. The neighbors can hear you screaming.
Yeah, he would have to close the door whenever my mom and I were watching basketball, 100%.
100%. Yeah. And so my mom had actually never been to a live basketball game. Basketball was one of the things she hadn't, but my husband works at the Raptors organization, and I took her on my birthday a couple of years ago. So by the end of it, if you were going at Scotty Barnes, my mother was going to box you out. Like, she had never watched basketball before, and suddenly she's all Scotty. Like, that's her nature. And I love that for her. So I would have thought that part the producers missed. It just feels like this constant corporatization of sport, and it's tacky, Kavitha.
I love that you said the word tacky, because like there's so much about the gatekeeping of tennis, and particularly events as expensive as the U.S. Open. It's a prohibitively expensive thing. You know, you go to the grounds, and I'm lucky to have been able to go as often as I have. But, you know, it's the wealthiest of the wealthy, and their $40 cocktails and people getting, you know, all kinds of things just for Instagram. But can we gatekeep on this just a little bit? That this is tacky, that this is like, there is something about like the dignity, which I think is overstated, but the dignity of this sport. It is really a beautiful sport, and there is some etiquette that I think is good. Some etiquette that obviously was the center of a lot of racialized conflict this year. But can we gatekeep the tackiness of a dating show centered around tennis? Is that okay?
Yeah, like I believe in disruption. You know that. I practice disruption in a good way, a good trouble. I love the way that Naomi and Serena and Layla and Venus and Vicky are disruptors. Arthur Ashe was a disruptor, right? Thea Gibson was a disruptor. I love all of that. However, they're not tacky. There's a difference between disruption and tackiness. I don't want to watch this lady, the figure skating lady, go on dates. Like, maybe through the first round, past the first round onto the next. Like, what is happening? And if they end up making it, do they go to the Super Bowl? Like, what is the point of this? Is it just the tequila?
Well, I'm like, they're not even tennis fans was like the most grating thing to me, kind of. Like, yes, they're not watching the matches. That is absolutely a lost opportunity because I feel like that would be hilarious because none of them are going to know what they're doing. And also, like, fans around them being annoyed at the cameras would, I think, also be hilarious. But there was one couple who they asked, like, if they were a tennis fan, and they were like, well, I kind of got into it last year. And it's like, well, why are you here?
Well, that's the thing. The first episode, the very, very first episode was this guy, the lacrosse teacher. And I was like, bruh, you can do better than this. Like, you can do better than this. And like, yeah, there's certain moments, and this is probably like my problematic statement, is I agree with you to gatekeep on certain elements. Like the class exuded at Wimbledon or Roland Garros is a French Open is different. It's different. I don't love it all the time. Like I'm like, I'll poo-poo this classist model, but then when it gets to
the all white thing at Wimbledon, we did an episode about that. Like we can have a real conversation about relaxing that a little bit. But
well, yeah, absolutely, and like which reminds me of cricket, right? Like those old imperial sort of mandates on uniform and dress code. However, I don't think we need to descend into this. Really. But I'm still going to watch it, Kavitha. It's terrible. I would still commit to watching it because it's like 6 or 7 minutes. I'm like, maybe when I'm on the terrible TTC commute, I can watch it.
I'm so glad we're on the same page with this. Okay, I know I have to let you go, but I just want to give you a moment to cook about the Bend It Like Beckham reboot. How excited are you? Where were you when you first heard? Like, what are you most looking forward to? And like, what are the pitfalls? Because reboots can go so many ways sideways.
Football, shootball. Your sister's getting engaged and you're sitting here watching this skinhead boy.
You must start behaving like a proper woman.
You're right.
Yeah, I think I'm like everyone else who desperately wanted it, but now that it's here, it's like with a lot of trepidation. I had interviewed Gurinder G years ago for Burn It All Down. Years ago. And I'd put it out there. If you're doing this, call me. Maybe there's a role for a sports journalist that I can take. You never know. But that being said, I know that Gurinder Chadha has partnered with Emma Hayes, coach of the U.S. women's national team. My concern is the focus will go more to Jules than it did to Jess. And it's a story that is definitely about Jess and her hurdles. But the crux of the story by an Indian filmmaker, which we still don't see enough of, was Jess for me. The impact was Jess. It wasn't Jules. And I just really hope that is carefully navigated through because I'm getting slightly uncomfortable with the amount of whiteness that seems to be protruding in a way. I don't like gatekeeping anything, but Bend It Like Beckham wasn't for the white girls. It was for the girls, but it starred a brown girl. Keira, and like even after the movie, the way that Keira Knightley's career exploded
versus Parminder's
was different, and it was case in point.
I think that I definitely share a lot of those concerns, and the hope is that in the 20 however many years it's been that they've heard some of that feedback and that they understand that we live in a much more culturally aware society now than we did then, and definitely a much more multiculturally aware Hollywood, right? And at the same time, I think that there might be some like really exciting opportunity for some Ted Lasso-esque elevation of, not that U.S. women's soccer needs it, but some Ted Lasso-esque elevation of the sport and of the actual teams and using real arenas and things like that. And maybe it'll trickle down to the NWSL and that could be really exciting. World Cup, U.S. hosting with Canada and Mexico, and our dear leader is not playing particularly nice with your country or with Mexico. How's that gonna go?
Terribly is my assessment. I just keep seeing pressers or interviews with Gianni Infantino. Gianni being like, "Oh, it'll be great. The Club
Did
World
you
Cup,
see
it'll be
that latest presser that he did with Trump, with the hat, and it was unhinged? Like, what were we there to talk about?"
So I'm worried about the safety. The safety of players and supporters will always be, and like officials will always be my first thing. But when you have 8 countries from the African continent coming, from AFCON, the Confederation, you have definitely Iran qualifies because they qualify all the time. They're like one of the top seeds in the AFC, the Asian Football Confederation. I'm concerned about this. Mm-hmm. I'm absolutely concerned for their safety. Even like Dr. Brenda Elsey, one of my closest friends, has said and told anecdotally how watch parties in the United States of common ball events are canceled because ICE shows up. The joy around football relating to immigrant communities and relating to different cultures and ethnicities has been quashed because of the political situation. So Trump is, it's conjecture, going to try to micromanage how football is taken in, which is absolutely not how football is done. Like proper football. He has no idea and zero connection other than a gold trophy on his desk to what this is and how it means for people around the world. I'm not looking forward to it. I will be writing all the time about it because I'm furious. Generally, I'm worried about the harm put onto people. The football will be beautiful because it's football and it's exciting. And I'm not talking about just the football. This World Cup will be about so much more, and I hope it's remembered and chronicled as such.
Absolutely. Well, on that note, Shireen, I could talk to you for hours. As you know, next time you're in New York and you don't call me, I will be mad.
Says the Toronto girl.
I know. I'm sorry. I was there for 2 days, but I loved it so much, and I will absolutely come back up. And we've got mutual friends, really good mutual friends that we will definitely bond over. But thank you so much for joining us. As always, I love and appreciate your perspective, and it's so necessary, and it helps open doors for my perspective and for perspective like people like ours as well. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me, and I'll see you soon.
Absolutely. Thanks for tuning into Sportly. Tune in next week and every week after for a new episode. And if you have thoughts or suggestions for a topic you'd like me to cover, I'd love to hear from you. Please feel free to email me at kavitha@immigrantlypod.com. And if you've been enjoying our episodes so far, please leave us a rating or review on the podcast app of your choice. Sportly is an Immigrantly media production. This episode was produced by Paroma Chakravarti. Executive producer is Sadia Khan. Our sound designer and editor is Paroma Chakravarti. Our theme music was created by Simon Hutchinson. Other music by Epidemic Sound. Tune back in next week for more Sportly.